great cuisine from a ballpark, and roses that don't require much care. Hey, this show's all about solutions, and it starts right after this. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to the show. Now today we're going to talk about solutions, and what I've learned is that often the solution is making the best choice in the beginning of whatever you plan to do, especially planting a container or a garden. We've got so many interesting things coming up in the show. For instance, if you're looking for the perfect plant for your garden that's bred to be disease resistant, chemical free, and extremely colorful, I've got a rose for you. And then we'll take a viewer question, someone who's struggling with tomatoes, and hopefully my tip will help you. Plus, we're going to take you out to the ball game for a fine dining experience. No, you didn't hear me wrong. We're going to sample an amazing garden fresh recipe at a ballpark restaurant. And as we ease into the break, I want to show you this historic house. You know you've seen it a million times before, but where is it? We'll head right there after the break, so stick around and find out. You just can't believe the fragrance of these petunias. You know, I have to say, one of the fascinating things about gardening and horticulture is learning the origins of plants. I know those botanical names can be a little challenging, but when you get in and you start studying where the modern petunia came from, well, it's interesting. For instance, the modern petunia, like this one, which is actually a supertunia, one called Vista Bubblegum Pink, it came from originally Mexico. And look at its little counterpart here. I love this one. It's called Vista Silverberry. Just look at that pink, sort of slight violet veining in the flowers. And if we jump back over here, you'll see a coleus. This variety is called Kingswood Torch, and it can take full hot sun. The origins of the coleus, well, they come from parts of Africa, all the way into Asia, and into Australia. Very interesting plants and add so much panache to the garden. And take a look at this. This is a heuchera. Heucheras are native to North America. What gorgeous foliage. This is a wonderful addition to any shade garden. So if you think about it, you can gather all of these different kinds of plants, place them in one place, your garden, and you can go on a world tour. Now that's exactly what George W. Vanderbilt did. He was a great tourist, a grand tourist you might say, looking for objects to go into his beautiful Biltmore. And recently there was an exhibition there that showed the travels of George W. Vanderbilt through the eyes of a gardener. It was really quite whimsical. If you've never been to Biltmore, it's really worth putting on your list of places to see. Suzanne Woodell of Biltmore gives us a tour of the walled garden.
Well, one of the reasons why we decided to do a topiary show is the kids are really interested in it. A lot of times kids are kind of bored with gardens, so we're trying to think of something that would attract the children. To tie it into authenticity, we decided to use George Vanderbilt's travels to pick the pieces that we would create. We looked up postcards from the early 1900s and tried to recreate that to kind of feel. So it's just to help identify the country that the person's looking at. England is a jumping horse with a rider on a fox hunt. The garden style around that particular topiary is like an English cottage style garden. The English jumping horse is the one that wows the most people because you start down the steps from the pergola and it's just perfectly framed with the trees and the shrubs, and it's just a big wow. India is an elephant. The garden represents India by plants that have lots of scent to them and lots of really vibrant colors. We used different varieties of ivy for different things. For instance, an elephant, we used a variety that is a green and white variegation that has a little bit of a gray tint to try to read a gray elephant. We used the alternanthera to create the patterns for the elephant's blanket and his headdress. France is the Eiffel Tower, and that topiary is a little different than all the other ones. It's more like a trellis, and the vine trellises up the Eiffel Tower. Germany is a beer wagon, and the horse is actually the topiary part, and he's pulling a wagon with beer barrels in it. The garden around that piece of topiary is representative of a Mary garden, and some of the plants in that garden are names that were similar to the Virgin Mary or Jesus Christ. It's just the detail that's involved in it that really reads well after it's planted.
Up next, a colorful rose bush that can be planted just about anywhere in your garden. And a little later, from this to this, the transformation of the vegetable garden at the Garden Home Retreat. I don't know about you, but they're just things that I love to grow. They may not last very long, but it's just worth it. Like these sweet peas. They're just now coming into bloom, and they're so fragrant, wonderful old-fashioned plant. The downside, of course, in my part of the world is once it gets really hot, the sweet peas die back. I have to plant them very early, and I have to plant them every year. Now, I also love roses, and I have filled my garden with old-fashioned roses throughout the years, as well as a modern rose called Knockout. Steve Hutton, the president of Conard Pyle, visited the farm recently where we talked about his line of Knockout roses. You know, Steve, one of the things that I love to do is mix roses with all sorts of things. And here in this circular part of the garden, you'll see that I've taken rainbow Knockout and integrated it with all these grasses and annuals and perennials.
Well, you know, Alan, we call rainbow for good reason. It is an interesting mix with a coleus, which is a rainbow unto itself.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the warm tones of that rainbow flower, which, by the way, I love. I love the color and I love the simplicity of
Right,
it.
I agree. And, you know, even though there are a lot of different hues going on with rainbow Knockout, it almost calms down the coleus a little bit.
Yeah, it does. What I'm curious about, where would rainbow fit in terms of bloom power and size and so forth?
There are just 3 or 4 simple criteria. Absolute ironclad disease resistance. Plant it and walk away.
Right.
So that you really don't have to fuss with this. Another is flower power, and another is just winter hardiness.
Yeah.
Rainbow has all those characteristics, which is why it's a knockout.
You know, the thing I want to make sure that I don't do is encroach on these arbovita because they're important architectural elements in this garden.
And, you know, if it gets to the point where it does, whack them to the ground. I mean, just, you know, you can whack them down to 2 or 3 inches. You know, you be fearless.
Yeah, and they just flush back out.
In fact, you will generally, if you wait till they're completely dormant, as you know in the wintertime,
Right.
all growth is stopped before the new growth of spring is started.
And you wouldn't have any problem, Steve, cutting these down to, say, 6 inches tall?
I wouldn't, not for a second. In fact, that often reinvigorates the plant. You get a lot of new growth.
Yeah,
You take out the old twiggy growth, which at my garden, I cut back Knockout once every 3 years. I think after year 3, you start to lose some flower power. A lot of people typically think, do I need to deadhead my rose? Bill Rattler, the breeder of Knockout, says deadheading actually diminishes the flowering. Just
Really?
let them go. Don't come in here and fuss with the thing. That's why we call them Knockout. It's just, you don't fuss.
They're great. Of course, Steve saw the garden once it had been planted. But can you believe that this is what our vegetable garden originally looked like? Up next, we'll learn about the dry stack stone walls at the Garden Home Retreat. And a little later, we'll answer a viewer's question about how to deal with tomatoes. So stay with us. The hotter it gets outside, the more flowers luscious citrus blend lantana produce. The blooms in citrus blend are clusters of tiny, brilliant red-orange flowers and a few yellow ones in the center. I've planted them in combination with coleus, such as this one called Texas Parking Lot. What a name. And this one with really bright foliage called Big Red Judy. This is a plant that does not need a lot of water during the summer. So think about that when you're planting your garden. Now, when we first started on the construction of the gardens at the Garden Home Retreat, we had to deal with several issues. This was a sloping pasture, so I knew I was going to have to create some terraces. And then I had to figure out, well, what would the material be that we would create the terraces with? And it just seemed that natural fieldstone was the answer. So with that in mind, I contacted Jim Sparks with the Course Doctors, and believe me, he and his team had the answer. Well, Jim, I'm so pleased with the way this wall turned out. It really looks good.
Thank you very much. Our guys did a great job. It's quite an art form that they are able to produce.
Well, it is. I mean, you know, it looks like it's been here for 100 years.
That's what we strive to do, is make it look natural.
Now, what I like so much about the wall you created is the soft serpentine line, but it also creates a sense of enclosure. It divides two spaces and accents an entry into another part or another space. I'm fascinated by how consistent the wall is in terms of its width, from top to bottom and all the way down the length.
Well, the larger stones are for support at the base of the wall for future support. And depends upon the size of the stone. This was a 24-inch wall. And we used some stones that were 12 inches on each side. And some of the stones we're fortunate to have actually 30-inch stones we chipped away to get that 24-inch width. As we come up, we use a smaller stone as we get to the top. And we even take the smaller chips of the stones and the scrap stones that come in any stone pile, and we use those inside the wall for support.
So nothing goes unused.
Exactly, nothing is wasted on a rock wall.
But Jim, with course doctors, what sort of rocks do you guys typically use? Are there any rules of thumb that you follow?
Well, actually, we try to use a native stone from the area. There's a lot of things that influence that, the cost of the stone and the logistics to get the stone to the site. But it just feels natural. You look into the native areas around, into the wooded areas or to some other areas close by, and we try to use native stone.
Just take your lead from nature.
Exactly. That's the best lead. It's been working for a number of years.
Very good. Often you hear these walls described as dry stack walls, which means there's no mortar used in them at all, but that's really not the case in the wall we built here.
That's correct. On this wall we use mortar, just a small amount on the inside of the wall for support. You don't actually see the mortar inside the rock joints. And on the top of the wall, as we seal the wall off, we'll use mortar up there, very small amount, just to keep the weather, the rain and the freezing from freezing and thawing and destroying the wall. Over the years, and some of the other walls that you see on some of the older farms, that's what makes the walls fall down or crumble, is the freezing and thawing or the weather that penetrates the wall.
Well, Jim, it just looks fantastic, and it's just the right height to keep a few sheep in.
And that's perfect.
I really enjoy getting viewer questions, and this one comes from Cecily in Manhattan, not a place you would think about gardening. She says, Alan, I'm desperate to grow some of my own tomatoes. How can I do it in limited space? Well, Cecily, probably the best thing to do is to grow tomatoes in containers. They're great for that, but you have to make sure that you choose the right tomato. For instance, you want a tomato that is determinate, meaning that it will stay a certain size. And you'll see on the tags determinate and indeterminate. Indeterminate means it's going to grow like a tomato vine. Okay, so think about the variety. You're also going to need full sun. Tomatoes love full sun. They need at least 6 to 7 hours a day for them to perform. The other thing you'll want to keep in mind is you want to plant in a large container. The larger the better. That just gives more opportunity for those roots to grow. And I always think you need to place the container in a saucer because you want to make sure that the soil stays consistently moist, okay? Now, I recommend using a blend of soil that is designed for container gardening, such as ProMix. That's what I use, and that's what I've used here for this particular tomato. Now, the other thing that you want to keep in mind, when you plant your tomato, and I know this is not going to make a lot of sense, I want you to go in and pinch off all of the leaves, like this, up to the very tip of the tomato. You see how I did that? All right. Now, when you plant it, you're going to plant that tomato 3/4 of the trunk or stalk in the ground, all right? So you'll only have 25% of it showing. That will help it establish a very strong root system. Cecily, if you have full sun and a large container like this, you can grow tomatoes. All right, we're headed to the ballpark next, but we're not going to talk about popcorn, peanuts, or Cracker Jacks in today's recipe segment. We'll show you how to mix fine dining with baseball next. It's not often that during a fine dining experience you overhear "play ball" being yelled and then the cheer of a large crowd. But that's just the way it is at this ballpark. we caught up with Chef Ben Brainerd, who shares one of Ump's Pub and Grill's favorite dishes, grilled nectarines with blue cheese and honey.
Hi, I've got a very easy and amazingly delicious recipe for you guys today. It is a grilled nectarine and blue cheese appetizer, which is easily applicable either in the kitchen or at the barbecue. You're gonna start with fresh nectarines. You can use peaches as well. I prefer nectarines because of the skin. The fuzzy skin of a peach on the grill doesn't always work real well. So all I'm doing is I'm gonna cut it in half to take out the seed, and I'm gonna introduce a little fat to promote some caramelization on the grill. In this case, I'm using olive oil. Now, the natural sweetness of the nectarine is gonna be complemented really well with the sweetness that you are creating off the grill with the caramelization. When you find some seasonally perfect nectarines, they're gonna be naturally sweet. You're not gonna have to mess with them very much. This recipe just makes them a little bit sweeter. Afterwards, you're going to finish with blue cheese. I'm using Gorgonzola today. You can use Maytag Blue as well. Gorgonzola Dolce is another fantastic choice. And you're gonna garnish with honey and black pepper, and you're gonna be the most popular guy at the barbecue.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's show. But I want to say this, if you love nectarines the way I love nectarines, give that recipe a try. It's a home run. Any of the information that you've seen on today's show about those beautiful knockout roses, many of these gorgeous petunias and so forth, well, it's all on my website, pallensmith.com. I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I have. Until next time, from the garden, I'm Alan Smith.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.